that we live through symbols, art, visuals. We even speak in visual language. You know, someone might say, do you see what I'm saying? Is what I'm saying clear? So I think that interacting directly with this symbolic dimension of life lets you see things a little bit more clearly, maybe more intentionally, live and analyze your own worldview. So the way that art syncs up with thought and thinking and worldview, you could say, that's another big dimension to what I do.
And your Patreon, the Owen Cyclops Patreon, what kind of content do you put up there?
Yeah, so on my Patreon, I basically give people the backstage view of my art studio here. I suppose that's the other aspect of what I do in my little operation that I didn't talk about, but I live out in somewhere in rural America, somewhere undisclosed, and I have this art studio, and I basically make art all the time, full time. So I'm always making prints, I make shirts, cool graphics, I make comics also and things like that. So the Patreon is the behind-the-scenes view. So normal people see the front-facing stuff, all the art that comes out, and things like that. But on Patreon, I post, my sketchbook, work in progress, how things are developing. Basically, it's the behind-the-scenes view of my art studio here.
Yeah, that's interesting. When you started talking about living, deep woods, but making a full-time living off of art, the first thing that popped into my head was the Unabomber, And I found out recently that Greta Thunberg, that little girl, the climate change girl, is in communication with they're pen pals with the Unabomber, right? What do you make of that? And what do you make of this Unabomber? Well, put aside the bombing, his theory about technology and too much automation and development in our lifestyle.
Oh man!
Putting aside the bombing.
Well, yeah, no, of course, yeah. Well, I mean, of course, it goes without saying, but it's. Any sort of like political violence stuff, I have to, I do actually, I don't have to, I do, disavow, of course. But in terms of his ideas, I think it's really interesting because I don't know if most people that would be listening to this would know, but he actually has a lot of writings on the way the technology would affect society theoretically, and then it actually happened that I think were crazy insightful. Actually, it's really odd that you bring it up. I do mention some things that at least one thing in particular that I picked up from his writings around people, and then when they say, "Oh, where'd you hear that?" Sometimes I say, "I don't know, I just picked it up somewhere." I don't tell them that it's from, Ted Kaczynski or something. But he has this idea, one in particular, that gets talked about in certain circles online, called over-socialization, and it's really interesting. Have you heard of over-socialization before?
No, I've never heard the expression before.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love it. So it's a great example. It's one of these like little mental tools that you can pick up, a little sort of almost like a little picture you can pick up and then see it. Once you know what it looks like, you can see it out in real life. So we're all familiar with socialization. I think I'm pretty well socialized. You seem pretty well socialized, So if we were hanging out and I brought you around with some of my friends, I wouldn't really worry about you being poorly socialized. We could hang out. I could be pretty safely assured that you would adhere to at least some level of social norms. You could do the same with me. And we probably know some people that are poorly socialized, or we can at least imagine someone who is poorly socialized. And then if we brought them around to people, we might be worried that they're going to transgress these social norms, right? So there's a spectrum of socialization. You can be poorly socialized, you can be well socialized, but then it also goes further down that spectrum, and you can be over socialized. There's someone that can be socialized too much. And in my opinion, that's a huge aspect of what we're dealing with now, where the consequence of that is that you exist too much within whatever you perceive the social norms to be. And if anyone transgresses what you perceive the social norms to be, it basically sets off like these crazy red alarm bells, and you don't know how to act when someone transgresses anything that you perceive as a social norm at all. And I think that's a really useful idea because, in my opinion, anyone that has any ideas whatsoever, no matter what it is, that aren't, what the normal things you're supposed to be thinking are, has probably encountered that phenomenon where you're talking about something and you just happen to say something that's not even that controversial, just something maybe a little out of the ordinary. And sometimes you can actually see on people's faces these red alarm bells go off. And if you try and engage with it logically and you say, oh, I'm not saying anything crazy, like I was just saying X, Y, and Z, you can't, because it's an emotional reaction in their mind. They have seen you go off the rails of, the little like roller coaster, the little rails of socialization. You've gone off the path, and they're basically smashing the alarm bell. I think probably anyone that has any controversial or even not normal ideas whatsoever. is familiar with that, but it's kind of often difficult in the moment to pin it down. But that idea, for example, which he talked about, he's actually the one that coined that term, over socialization, and that was all the way back then. I think that's a huge aspect of what we're dealing with in general, I would say. And then it syncs up with tech also. It goes on and on and on.
That's fascinating, because I'm dealing with something in my personal life. I get involved in a lot of behind-the-scenes, 24-hour news stories over the years, many, many things. And so I'll be sitting down, with the dinner table there, and I'll say, well, that's what they say on CNN, but here's what really happened. Like the Hunter Biden laptop, I know the whole story about what's behind that. And people kind of you're right, they have a reaction that they just can't, they freak out. A switch goes off, and they just can't accept it.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's unintentionally, been a huge part of my, I guess, I don't want to say development, but it's been a huge part of my, I guess work sounds pretentious also. It's a huge part of my vibe, I'll say, keeping it casual, is figuring out what the deal is with all of that. Because I used to live in New York. I don't tell people where I live now, but I used to live in New York. And I feel like around 2015, 2016, 2017, you could literally feel this type of, exactly what we just described. You could feel this sort of new level of over-socialization descend on the populace. And I really felt that shift. All of a sudden, I've always been kind of a crazy ideas guy, maybe obviously. And it used to be, you have some crazy ideas and people are like, oh, there's Owen, with his crazy ideas. But we crossed a certain point where all of a sudden that wasn't the reaction I was getting. The reaction I was getting was more fear and anger and just really terror. Terror is the perfect word, because terror combines a kind of like fight or flight with fear and anger. And I was really confused, and I was getting it from everyone around me. And I started trying to figure it out. And that's really a huge part of how I became who I am. I mean, that's part of why I'm anonymous also, is because when I talk about anything like that, I have to be able to speak freely, and everyone, almost everyone, maybe not, 5% of the population, but almost everyone has certain topics where if you touch those topics, they will kick on those red alarm bells. And that's initially why I became anonymous as an artist. I thought I have to be able to address and talk about everything to figure this out. And that's a big part of how it all started, yeah.
So now, have you had problems with stalkers?
No, nothing like that. But it's more to shield against this kind of, how would you describe it? People, it's almost like there's this, there's so many things that we don't really have language for yet that we're sort of figuring out the language for. But it's almost like a mental, it's not really a labyrinth, but there's this network of signs and signifiers and basically arrows pointing to each other that essentially everyone is enmeshed in. And I think it's really, really easy for things to spin out of control and people to get the wrong idea. Like you were just saying, like you're at some party and you say, yeah, well, the news said this, but really, what really happened is this. And someone hears you say that, and they say to someone else, hey, that guy, like, he thinks the news is not real. He thinks the news is fake. And then someone else tells someone else, that guy thinks that, like, and then it spirals out of control, and all of a sudden you're getting phone calls like, Brian said that you think, like, lizard people run, the Federal Reserve, which maybe that's true. I don't care. But the point is that things really spiral out of control really quickly, and that's part of why I did that. I can't, like, go around being concerned that if I say the wrong thing about some random topic that it's going to blow back into, like, my real life. Although oddly, this has become my real life. Now this is more my real life than anything else. But yeah, it's mostly a shield against, things like that. Things sort of getting out of control, you could say.
And just to be clear, we all know that it's snake people that run the Federal Reserve. We don't want to mislead the audience.
I was like, this is a bad example because that's actually true.
But it's fascinating because this is something that drives me crazy, because this will be like a case I'm working on. This is what I go to work, and I'm working on this case, and someone's watching on the news, and they think they know more about it than I do. It's my story. It's my case. It's my job.
Yeah.
It's a disconnect. Now, we're going over time, but I want to ask you a question. Do you think this is by design? Or is this just a society out of control, running out of control?
I think it's a few complex factors dovetailing together perfectly. I used to work with a lot of like Asian art, actually, to make an odd parallel. And sometimes they have these joints where, 10 different pieces of wood will all come together and fit perfectly together to make one joint. And I think it's really like that. There's these, historical factors, and then things that are loaded into the worldview that kind of have spiraled out of control. Some of it's probably intentional. A lot of it is people's emotion or inability to think at like a meta level and analyze their worldview. So I think it's a few complex factors dovetailing together. I mean, I could be more specific, but yeah, that's kind of my overall large-scale picture of it.
Because, like, I'm thinking, and clearly with the data mining that happens online with us these days, they can predict what we want to buy, and even before we know we want to buy it, or we're going to our next move. But some of the people I'm thinking of they're not online. They're not online at all. They don't even have smartphones. And still, like, TV is doing it to them, I guess. You think?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I've spent like years of my life banging my head against that wall.
Okay.
Where you just want to climb into someone's brain and say, wait, where did you get that specific term? Where did you get that specific idea? Like, who put this in here? Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with worldview and the way that it kind of fits with what we were talking about before. Like, the way that a worldview, I guess people kind of think of it as like a few things maybe sitting on a table, a few ideas, a few concepts, but it's actually loaded back, and all those things have huge threads and arrows, and it's almost more like a big, like, what's that game, like Mousetrap, where you or like a Rube Goldberg machine, So I think that's how you really get those results, where someone, like you just said, you're not on Facebook, you're not online, but you can feed the information into it and reliably have a dependable outcome for how it's going to come out, because how things are determined is set by the worldview. One analogy that I use a lot is, people kind of tend to operate on this level where they think, information, politics, sociology, theology, all this stuff, or anything complicated, operates on this level where, I found evidence. Here's a bloody knife. Therefore, there's a murder, like 1, 2, 3. But really, all evidence is interpreted in terms of a worldview. And I think that's how you get those confusing results, where you find someone, and like I just said, he's not hooked into the information sphere, but you still get the same result out because they're already loaded with the worldview.
Now, just a minute ago off the air, you were trying to explain to me, I guess, this journey that you took involving Bigfoot and 411, missing 411, and DMT. Tell us what you wanted to tell me.
Yeah, so I thought it would be interesting. It's one of the things that I've written that definitely blew up the most and got the most attention online.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a meandering walk, but I mean, that's what part of what the radio story form is for, I guess.
Yeah.
But long story short, I was always into different paranormal, strange phenomenon like we were just talking about. And I had always written off things like aliens. We brushed on that for a second. And you mentioned, something about it, with the military and things like that. But one of the things that really roped me into it was, I don't think most people in the general population are aware of this, but there's a lot of data on how people react and the long-term effects of them encountering UFOs. I had initially written it off because I thought, people could just be telling these stories. You mentioned it attracts like charlatans, people trying to sell their book and stuff like that. But I saw this data, some of it from Harvard and these supposedly reputable institutions. And one of the ones that really stuck with me was people who have these abduction experiences. Basically, you can hook them up to, machines and measure their sweat and their heart rate and stuff. And when they talk about their experiences, they have the same level of repeated sort of physical trauma, like sweating and elevated heart rate, that people experience when they go to war and come back and talk about their war stories. So for the people, whether, these aliens and stuff are real or not, they actually do experience it as real trauma. So I found that and I thought, that's really weird, or it's really strange. And I looked into how many of these, alien encounters there are, and the story itself kind of started to unravel for me, because people think of aliens as coming from these other worlds. They're super advanced, with their technology and everything. But I was thinking, if that's the case, why do they have to abduct people and traumatize them? It's just kind of a really strange piece of data. At the same time, we were talking just over the break about missing 411. In case people don't know, there's a ton of disappearances in national parks. It's really, really strange. People disappear in these clusters. And the details of those stories are really strange also. You'll get these stories where people, at first you think, someone disappeared in a national park, right? That makes perfect sense. But you get these details like someone will walk out onto a frozen lake and they'll find their footprints, and then boom, they're just gone. The footprints just almost like they're lifted up in the air. And there's these patterns, people